Sir, this is first class. The flight attendant snapped, jabbing her finger toward his face, not knowing she was about to lose her job to the man who signed her paychecks. The hum of jet engines vibrated softly through the cabin as the final call for boarding echoed through JFK International Airport. The Airbus A350 bound for London had just closed its doors. In the premium cabin, plush leather seats cradled elite passengers, many already sipping wine, some scrolling their phones, others leaning back to steal a moment of peace before takeoff. A T seat 1A. A sharply dressed black man in his late 30s adjusted the cuff of his navy checkered suit. His tie was immaculate, his demeanor calm. His name was Malcolm Pierce, though most people knew him by title. Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Skyways, one of the fastest-growing international carriers in the world. But on this flight, no one knew his name, and especially not Jessica Moore, the young flight attendant now walking briskly down the aisle toward him. She'd noticed him during boarding, exchanging whispers with a colleague. Her face had twitched in visible irritation the moment she saw a black man settle into one of the airline's most exclusive seats to her. It didn't matter what suit he wore or how calm he looked. She'd made up her mind before they even took off. Jessica halted beside him, arms crossed. "Sir," she said loudly, enough for 2 rows ahead and behind to hear. "This is first class." Malcolm looked up slowly, locking eyes with her. He offered a polite nod. "Yes. Is there an issue?" Jessica's tone sharpened. "This seat is for Diamond Elite passengers or full-fare first-class ticket holders. You'll need to show your boarding pass." A few heads turned. Some passengers began to glance over. An elderly woman across the aisle leaned slightly, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. Malcolm reached inside his jacket, pulled out a pristine boarding pass, and handed it to her. Jessica took it, eyes scanning quickly. Her frown deepened. It clearly said Seat 1A, Diamond Elite Priority. Still, she didn't back down. "I'll need to double-check this with the gate. Stay here. But don't get too comfortable," she added, voice dripping with something colder than professionalism. Malcolm's brows rose slightly, but he remained composed. "I assure you, I'm exactly where I belong." Jessica didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel and marched to the galley. Malcolm sighed and shook his head slowly. This wasn't new. It was exhausting how often these situations unfolded, even after all he'd achieved. He'd once delivered a keynote at the World Aviation Forum, had his face on Forbes, restructured an airline from near collapse. But none of it stopped someone from seeing only the color of his skin. That he picked up his phone, discreetly opened his contacts, and tapped a name. Back in the galley, Jessica ranted to another flight attendant. "I'm telling you, he's in the wrong seat. There's no way someone like that is Diamond Elite." "Jessica," her coworker whispered, glancing nervously down the aisle. "What if you're wrong?" "I'm not. I've worked here for 5 years. I can smell when someone doesn't belong." That sentence, "doesn't belong," echoed like a gunshot. And unfortunately, someone else heard it too. A businessman seated in 1C turned around, raising an eyebrow. Another woman, a lawyer from London, pulled out her phone quietly and hit record. The mood had shifted. Minutes later, Jessica returned. "Sir," she barked, "security will be reviewing this situation shortly. Until then, do not move." Malcolm didn't flinch. He simply replied, "I understand. May I ask your name?" "Jessica Moore," she snapped. He smiled lightly and tapped something into his phone. "Thank you. That's helpful." A pause. Jessica blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," he said, voice steady, "I've just notified the COO of this airline. You'll likely be getting a call shortly." Jessica's posture faltered. "Wait, the COO?" He nodded. "And if I were you, I'd recommend taking a break before you make this worse." "You're threatening me now?" "No. I'm reminding you that your assumptions may carry consequences." Jessica took a step back. Around them, the energy in the cabin shifted again. Several passengers were watching openly now. One whispered, "Did he just say so?" Malcolm placed his phone on airplane mode and tucked it away. The flight was about to taxi. But even before the wheels moved, the real turbulence had already begun. Up in the cockpit, the captain's headset buzzed. A message came through, not from the control tower, but from corporate. "Be advised," it said. "Passenger in 1A is CEO Malcolm Pierce. Full cooperation required." Back in the cabin, Jessica had gone pale. A supervisor had entered the plane from the jet bridge. She approached quickly and spoke in hushed tones with Jessica, who was now trembling. The supervisor then turned to Malcolm, smiling warmly. "Mr. Pierce, we sincerely apologize. Would you like anything before we take off?" Jessica's eyes widened. "Mr. Pierce?" And then it clicked. Her mouth opened slightly, the blood draining from her face. The man she'd accused was her boss. Her boss's boss. The man who, quite literally, had the power to fire her on the spot. But Malcolm simply leaned back in his seat. "No need," he said. "Let's just enjoy the flight. I'll handle the rest after landing." And with that, silence returned to the cabin. But it wasn't peace. It was the eerie silence that follows when arrogance meets truth. Her voice faltered as she repeated the name, "Mr. Pierce." It echoed in the cabin like thunder. That was the moment she knew. She had yelled at the man who could end her career with a single call. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She blinked rapidly, her mind scrambling for footing as the supervisor's words looped in her head like an alarm bell. "Mr. Pierce, we sincerely apologize." Mr. Pierce, that she'd read the name before, on corporate memos, internal emails, articles praising the new CEO's revolutionary leadership. But never, not once, had she imagined he'd be the one sitting silently in seat 1A. And certainly not the man she had just publicly humiliated. The realization settled in her chest like a cinder block. Passengers around them were whispering now, some glancing between Jessica and the man she'd berated. Others had stopped pretending not to look, their faces etched with disbelief and, in some cases, satisfaction. It wasn't every day you saw arrogance unravel itself so publicly. Meanwhile, Malcolm Pierce remained composed. He reclined slightly, folding his hands over his lap. His expression wasn't angry. It was calm, measured, the kind of look that said, "You've made your move. Now watch mine." Jessica took a step backward. "I didn't know," she stammered. "I didn't recognize." Malcolm looked up at her. "That much is clear." The supervisor gave Jessica a quiet glance. "Let's speak in the galley," she said, voice low but firm. Jessica followed her out of the cabin. Her legs moved like lead. She could feel the eyes boring into her back, the looks of passengers who'd seen the entire thing unfold. Some looked amused, others disgusted. One woman shook her head slowly, lips pursed in disapproval. Jessica's mind raced. Will I be fired on the spot? Will there be a hearing? A suspension? In the galley, her supervisor crossed her arms. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Jessica tried to speak. "I didn't mean..." "No, you didn't mean to yell at the CEO of our airline in front of a plane full of elite customers. You didn't mean to assume he didn't belong in first class. You didn't mean to make this company liable for discrimination." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "It's not what it looked like." "Oh, Jessica," the supervisor cut in. "It's exactly what it looked like." Back in the cabin, the captain had received a quiet instruction through his earpiece. "Do not depart until further notice from corporate." Meanwhile, Malcolm pulled out his tablet. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed and exhausted. This wasn't new. He'd experienced the same doubting glances when walking into boardrooms, the same microaggressions in business lounges. But this was different. This wasn't just another stranger. This was one of his employees, representing his airline, trying to humiliate him. He turned to the passenger in 1C, a silver-haired man in his 60s, watching silently. "Quite the start to a flight, huh?" The man chuckled. "Well, I've flown this route for 20 years. Never seen something like that. You handled it well." "Did I?" Malcolm sighed. "I didn't want to make a scene. But at some point, silence starts to look like permission." The man nodded. "Good thing you spoke up. That girl needed a wake-up call." Minutes passed. The murmurs didn't die down. Two business-class passengers came forward and quietly offered words of support. "Sir, just wanted to say, that was completely uncalled for," one of them said. "Glad you stood your ground." "Thank you," Malcolm replied. Finally, Jessica returned. Her face was pale, lips tight. She walked up slowly to Malcolm's seat. "I owe you an apology," she began, barely above a whisper. "I was wrong to assume you didn't belong here." "I'm sorry." Malcolm looked at her. "Are you apologizing because I'm the CEO, or because it was the right thing to do?" Jessica's breath hitched. The question landed like a punch to the gut. I didn't recognize you," she admitted. "But I know that doesn't excuse it. I judged you." There it was. Honesty, fragile but real. Malcolm studied her. then nodded slowly. I appreciate the apology. It's not easy to admit when we're wrong. Jessica looked down. What happens now? I'll decide that after we land, he said simply. She nodded and walked away, quieter than she'd ever been on a flight. The rest of the cabin exhaled. There was no announcement, no further confrontation, just a quiet acknowledgement. Justice had been served, if only partially. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Malcolm knew this moment would ripple beyond this flight. It would be reviewed, recorded, dissected. He'd have to decide whether to use it as a lesson, a warning, or a turning point for the culture of his company. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, the intercom chimed. Ladies and gentlemen. The captain's voice came on, carefully neutral. We appreciate your patience. We're now cleared for departure. Please enjoy your flight with Atlantic Skyways. And as the engines roared to life and the aircraft lifted into the clouds, the tension slowly gave way to reflection. But in seat 1A, one man sat wide awake, already writing the next chapter in his mind. The flight hadn't even left the runway, but in the airline's executive offices, phones were ringing off the hook, and one name kept coming up. Jessica Moore. 3,000 miles away from the drama in the sky, Atlantic Skyways headquarters in Atlanta was already buzzing that a junior analyst named Corey had just finished reviewing the late-night incident reports when he spotted something strange. An executive-level ping from the COO with the subject line, Urgent, Flight 772, incident involving CEO. His eyebrows shot up. He clicked the message, and there it was, a summary of events from the onboard supervisor, detailing how a first-class flight attendant had verbally confronted and humiliated a black man, unaware he was the CEO. And worse, passengers had recorded it. Within minutes, the video clips began circulating through internal channels. It hadn't hit the public yet, but the tension in the corporate offices was real. The airline's general counsel was already looped in. HR was pulling up Jessica Moore's personnel file. The PR team was drafting contingency statements, just in case the eye in the sky. Flight 772 was now midair over the Atlantic, cruising calmly, but the emotional turbulence hadn't subsided. Jessica sat on the jump seat in the galley, her hands clasped tightly together, trembling. Her name badge, once a symbol of pride, now felt like a weight on her chest. Every minute that passed felt like a countdown to the inevitable. She replayed everything in her mind. The way she'd questioned him, the tone she'd used, the assumptions she'd made. And the look on his face when he calmly said, "Are you apologizing because I'm the CEO or because it was the right thing to do?" She wanted to disappear. The supervisor returned, standing just inside the curtain. "You'll need to write a full incident report the moment we land." Jessica nodded silently. The supervisor added, "And Jessica, you might want to speak to a union rep before you submit it." Meanwhile, in seat 1A, Malcolm Pierce wasn't resting. He was writing, not an angry rant, not a legal statement, but a reflection, a CEO's internal report about what this moment meant for the culture of his company. Not just for Jessica, but for the flight crew, for hiring practices, for the assumptions baked into the system that he titled it. Invisible walls at 35,000 feet, he started typing. When people talk about racism in modern institutions, they imagine it as overt violence or slurs. But often, it's subtler. It's embedded in who gets trusted, who gets challenged, who gets watched when they walk into the room. Today, it showed up in a flight attendant's voice, in her doubt, in her disbelief that someone like me could belong here. He paused, glanced out the window into the vast cloudscape, and continued. If our own employees don't recognize leadership beyond color, what does that say about the culture we've built? What are we teaching them in training? What have we failed to say? A flight attendant, not Jessica, approached with a nervous smile. "Mr. Pierce, would you like anything to eat or drink?" He looked up, appreciating the kindness, but shook his head. "Thank you. Just some water, please." She returned promptly, setting down a bottle and a glass. As he sipped quietly, the cabin remained calm, on the surface. But glances still flickered toward him. A few passengers nodded subtly in support. Others seemed unsure how to engage. No one wanted to interrupt, but they all knew they'd witnessed something that would follow them long after this flight landed at IN row 2. A woman opened her laptop and began typing furiously. She was a columnist for a major news outlet. She hadn't planned to write during this flight, but now her working title was I watched a CEO get profiled in first class, and he handled it with grace. 3 rows back, a teenage boy looked at his father and whispered, "Why was she yelling at him?" He didn't do anything. His father gave him a long look. "That's something we'll talk about after we land, okay?" In the cockpit, the captain, who had heard everything through the intercom, made a quiet mental note to file his own observation. He respected Malcolm Pierce, knew him by reputation. He'd read the man's articles in aviation magazines. He never imagined he'd be flying him personally or witnessing this. Back in the galley, Jessica sat alone. She finally unlocked her phone and opened her employee portal. On it, the company's slogan greeted her, Atlantic Skyways, lifting people, connecting worlds. She stared at the words, lifting people. Today, she had done the opposite. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't just about keeping her job now. It was about who she'd allowed herself to become. She had trained for years, flown hundreds of flights, learned safety procedures by heart. And yet, in one moment of bias, she had jeopardized everything. The PA crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into London shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts." The lights dimmed, window shades opened, and the clouds below began to part. Malcolm shut down his tablet. He'd finished writing, and he knew what had to come next. This couldn't end with a quiet apology. That IT had to become something more. A moment that shook the foundations of corporate culture, not just for Atlantic Skyways, but across the industry. Because if the man who ran the airline could be treated like he didn't belong, then what hope did any other black traveler have? The soft jolt of wheels hitting the tarmac signaled the end of Flight 772's journey across the Atlantic. Passengers barely noticed. No one clapped. No one sighed in relief. The cabin wasn't tired. It was tense. Jessica remained in the galley, frozen. She hadn't spoken since she'd apologized. Her shift was technically over, but she knew better. This was far from finished. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Again, and again, and again. She finally pulled it out. 38 unread messages. Point one from her roommate. "Girl, are you trending on Reddit right now?" Another from a fellow flight attendant. "Is it true what you did?" Someone posted a clip. "It's bad." Her heart sank. She clicked the link. There it was, grainy, recorded from a shaky phone, but unmistakable. Her face, her voice, her finger pointing. "Sir, this is first class. Do you even have a boarding pass? You need to move until I verify this." Then came the shift in tone, the audience gasping as someone whispered, "He's the CEO?" The comment section was already brutal. This is what systemic bias looks like. She judged him the moment he sat down. Imagine yelling at your own CEO. On camera. In uniform. Jessica felt sick. Meanwhile, Malcolm stood calmly as passengers began to disembark. Many offered polite nods, a few extended quiet thanks. One man said simply, "You changed how I see things." Malcolm only smiled, humble. "Thank you for witnessing." Outside the jet bridge, a car waited. Not just any car, an executive vehicle sent by the airline's London office. 2 suited staff members were standing by the gate, holding iPads, eyes scanning for him. Jessica watched from the galley door as Malcolm exited. She didn't expect him to turn around, but he did, and in that brief glance, he didn't glare. He didn't smirk. He simply looked at her, as if weighing whether this moment would define her or change her. She looked down. Back at the London HQ, chaos had already ignited. The video had gone viral overnight. Hashtag Seat1A was trending. News outlets were running headlines like, "Airline CEO profiled on own flight." "Incident goes viral. Flight attendant faces backlash after targeting CEO for being black." When bias boards first class, Malcolm met with his senior team in a closed-door session. He didn't ask for heads to roll. He didn't demand an apology. What he asked was far more powerful. How do we fix a culture that rewards assumption over inquiry and silence over courage? The room was quiet. He continued, "This isn't just about Jessica. It's about the fact that no one on that plane stopped her. Not fast enough. Not loud enough." One HR director finally spoke up. "We could make a public apology. Announce new diversity training. Maybe disciplinary action." Malcolm shook his head. "We will do those things. But not just as gestures. This can't be another PR spin. This has to be a transformation." 3 days later, Atlantic Skyways held a global town hall. Every employee, from ground crew to cabin crew to the boardroom, tuned in live. Malcolm stood at the center of a minimalist stage, behind no podium. Without teleprompters, he spoke from memory. From truth. Many of you saw what happened. Some of you have lived what happened, not just on planes, but in offices, in airports, in interviews. You've been questioned, doubted, dismissed. I know, because I have too. On that flight, I wasn't just your CEO. I was another black man being told he didn't belong. But this story isn't about me. It's about all of us. He paused. So starting today, we're launching a new initiative, Altitude Accountability. Every employee will undergo immersive training not just in diversity, but in empathy, in situational awareness, and in professional courage. We will also create a reporting structure that protects whistleblowers, and we'll reward those who intervene when something isn't right, whether it's a technical error or a human one. He looked directly into the camera. Because if we're truly in the business of connecting the world, then we must first learn to recognize the full humanity of everyone we serve and everyone we hire. The screen went black, then flashed a new slogan, Atlantic Skyways, where everyone belongs. Jessica watched it all from her apartment. She hadn't been fired, yet, but she had been suspended pending further review. Her union rep was fighting for her, citing clean work history, stress, fatigue, personal bias training gaps. Still, she knew this would follow her forever. She closed her laptop, curled up on the couch, and wept. Not because of the punishment, but because she finally saw it. The moment when she'd chosen power over respect, control over compassion. And now, the whole world had seen it too. A knock came at the door. It was her roommate, holding a grocery bag and an awkward smile. I brought chocolate, she said, and almond milk, and maybe a way to restart everything. Jessica didn't say anything. She just nodded and let her in, because somehow, she knew. This wasn't just a fall. It could be the start of a long, painful climb towards something better. 3 weeks had passed since Flight 772 landed in London, but the shockwaves it unleashed were still being felt across the industry. For the first week, Jessica Moore's name trended nonstop. She was condemned, mocked, analyzed, and quoted. Her image, pointing a finger at a calm black passenger, was screenshotted, dissected in think pieces, and flooded with commentary. She couldn't open her phone without seeing herself, but unlike others who disappeared after a scandal, Jessica didn't run. She went quiet, yes, but not to hide. She read. She studied. She sat in the silence and discomfort of what she'd done. Not just the surface-level act of questioning someone's seat, but the deeper impulse underneath it. The assumption, the unconscious bias. The immediate disbelief that someone like him could belong in seat 1A. She attended the internal altitude accountability sessions that the airline had rolled out in response to the incident. Not because it was required. She was on unpaid suspension, but because she needed to know if it was possible to unlearn what she had internalized. It first, people avoided sitting next to her in those sessions. But she kept showing up. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend herself. She listened. And then, one afternoon, an email came from Pierce at atlanticsky.com. Subject, reflection and next steps. Jessica, I've been briefed on your participation in the new training programs. I heard you've been showing up, not just physically, but with intention. That matters. Next week, I'm hosting a closed conversation with a select group of employees, flight crew, execs, ground staff, about how we rebuild culture from within. If you're willing, I'd like you there. Not as a warning. As a voice. Growth doesn't come from perfection. It comes from reckoning. Malcolm. Jessica read the email 3 times. Then she responded with just 2 words. I'm ready. The meeting took place in a modest conference room inside Atlantic Skyways headquarters. No stage, no formal seating, just a large circle of chairs. The CEO sat in the circle like everyone else. Pilots, baggage handlers, flight attendants, and executives gathered, not as ranks, but as people. Malcolm began, not with a statement, but a question. What do we tolerate without noticing? And who do we hurt because of it? He scanned the room. We're not here to punish one person or fix things overnight. We're here to name what we haven't named and finally face it. People shared stories. A ground agent described how passengers always asked to speak to her manager because they didn't believe she was in charge. A junior pilot talked about being mistaken for a trainee because of his accent. A gay flight attendant shared how he was afraid to report harassment from a frequent flyer. Then Malcolm said, "Jessica, if you're comfortable, you can speak now." Jessica stood slowly. Her voice shook, but she didn't hide. "I wish I could say I was having a bad day, or that I didn't know who you were, that it was just a mistake. But the truth is worse. I saw a black man in a suit in seat 1A, and I assumed he didn't belong. No training manual made me do that. I did, and I carry that shame with me every day." She paused, swallowing emotion. But shame isn't enough. What I did was wrong, but what I choose now is to unlearn it. Every day, actively, publicly. Because if I can be part of the problem in such a big way, then maybe I can be part of the solution too. The room was silent. Then one of the pilots clapped. Then the baggage handler. Then everyone else. 2 months later, a new internal video began circulating across Atlantic Skyways employee network. It was titled, "Belonging Above the Clouds." In it, flight attendants, pilots, and employees from every division shared stories, some painful, some hopeful, about identity, belonging, and respect. Jessica appeared halfway through. Sitting in uniform, hair down, no makeup, she looked directly into the camera. "I used to think fairness meant treating everyone the same. But now I know fairness means seeing people fully, knowing their stories, checking my assumptions, and having the courage to speak up when something feels wrong, even if it's my own behavior." That clip alone was shared over 400,000 times within 2 weeks. And Malcolm? He didn't need the spotlight. He let the company speak for itself. But when asked by the media what made Atlantic Skyways' culture shift work, he gave a short, powerful answer. "We didn't start with PR. We started with people. And we chose truth over comfort." 1 year later, a new slogan was unveiled across the airline's branding. Atlantic Skyways, everyone has a seat. And beneath that slogan, in small but unmissable type, was a quote from Malcolm's internal letter. "Belonging isn't a perk. It's a promise."